What is going on, and welcome back to another video from the MMA mustache. UFC 325 just took place. Volkanovski retained the belt. A few other people had some good performances, but I wanted to focus on a few people that won their fight but didn't really look as good as I thought they should. So let's have a look who we have here first. First is Jonathan Mikalev. Now, he was fighting out of Australia, quite a highly touted prospect, I would say. This guy debuted and on short notice and beat Kevin Jusay on another Australian card maybe a year and a half ago. Kevin Jusay is a decent striker. He fought out of City Kickboxing. So Jonathan came in and he slammed the body kick and he stole rounds 1 and 2, and it was a close third round in that fight. So this guy was kind of seen as someone that might be someone in the division. Now, recently in the weekend, he just faced Oban Elliott. And I've got to say, man, he might have walked away with the win, second round submission. It was a really bad look for him. He was the favorite going into this. I thought Oban Elliott was going to, Oban Elliott's kind of been built as this guy that has good grappling but not great stand-up. It's almost the other way around. Oban Elliott looked sharp on the feet. He looked quick on the feet. And he was exposing Jonathan in this fight. Jonathan had nothing but that body kick. On the feet, he was diving forward with these massive shots he was putting everything into. He looked wild. He looked crazy. He looked slow. He did rock Oban in the first round with a check hook that kind of stumbled Oban, but Oban's not a good fighter on the feet. And that was almost like a lucky shot. Now, luckily for Jonathan in the second round, he took Oban Elliott down and he was able to cut an angle and find a submission. So maybe Jonathan's still learning. Maybe he has 4 wins by submission, 2 by knockout. So maybe he is just more of a grappler and he'll look to improve as each fight goes on. Still early days in his UFC career. But I thought that Jonathan was the first one on the card that I saw that got a win that didn't really gain any stock for me. I didn't think that he really looked that impressive, and I expected a better performance out of him. So it'll be interesting to see where Jonathan goes from, forward from here. I had him to win this fight. I won't be as confident picking him in the next fight. Ultimately, it was an even worse look for Oban Elliott, but I expected Jonathan to be able to beat Oban on the feet quite easily. I thought he'd be able to use his kicks, establish range, be the bigger guy, but he really only had an advantage in the grappling. On the feet, he looked sloppy, and he looked like he's, one fraud check away from being KO'd, flatlined on the feet by someone in the welterweight division that actually knows what they're doing. With that being said, we're going to move on to our next person in this video. We only have 3. Next was Talison Teixeira, man. Oh my God, what an awful performance. I know that he won, and he clearly won round 1. He clearly won round 2. He did what needed to be done. But boy, was I lied to about this guy. When this guy first arrived on the scene, I was told by people in the know he can strike. He's 6'6". He's a killer on the feet. He is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. If he gets you down, you're absolutely screwed. What a terrible, terrible, terrible career start that this guy has had. He comes out there and he KOs Justin Tucker. That was impressive. A nice body kick, gets it done in 30 seconds. His next fight, he loses to 40-year-old Derek Lewis. But Derek Lewis is the KO king. You could argue that, you're allowed to get clipped once, and he was still fresh in his career, and Derek Lewis hit him, and it was kind of a wee bit of an early stoppage, even though Talison was using the cage to climb back up. But this performance was, everybody had written Tai Tuivasa off. Tai Tuivasa on a 5-fight losing streak, clearly doesn't have the discipline he once did, clearly doesn't need the career that he once did. He's off on other business ventures and things like that. This was Talison's time to shine. He came off a loss against Derek Lewis, and he still got a high-ranked opponent in Tai Tuivasa, who was like ranked 12. So the UFC were trying to put some credibility into this guy. They were trying to push him, and man, did he come short. They say that he's never been to 3 rounds, and that's why, but that's a bad look, man. In a heavyweight division where we want these young guys that are coming through to be killers, to look good, to be potential title contenders for people like Aspinall, for people like Cyril Gane to fight, because the top of heavyweight's been the same guys for the last 5 years now. And this guy just fumbled really badly. He goes out there, wins the first round, but kind of just grapples Tuivasa, and even when he's in full mount, can't really do much. Black belt in jiu-jitsu, didn't have really any submission attempts. On a guy like Tai Tuivasa, who's known for having 0 grappling, he looked terrible. And then in the third round, Tai Tuivasa just put the pressure on him, added some leg kicks in, and he broke this guy, man. This was actually Tai Tuivasa's fight to win. If Taito Ivasa hurt this guy on multiple occasions in the third round and hugged him and put him up against the cage where Tellison wanted to be. And watching the fight a second time, I think Ty was just really tired as well. But if Ty had dug a little bit more, he had Tellison hurt. He had him broken. It reminded me of the Jalen Turner-Dan Hooker fight, where Turner had kind of just given it all for his first 2 rounds, and once it got to that third round, he was just ready for the fight to be over. He was done. This was a bad look from Tellison. This was Taito Ivasa on a 5-fight losing streak, breaking you, making you look terrible. Taito Ivasa is not a guy known for his cardio, so if he's completely outdoing you in the third round and making you look like a bum, you really have no spot in this division. So I think Tellison's stock, as much as he won, I think his stock went down. I think people are going to care less about this guy. Losing to Derek Lewis and then getting broken by Taito Ivasa when you had a small amount of grappling you did nothing with. This has to be the least intimidating 6'6" guy we've ever seen. And what are they going to do with him next? Does he get past Waldo? Of course not. Does he get past anyone in the top 5? Of course not. Once you beat Taito Ivasa, you're now in the area where, congratulations, all the other heavyweights know how to grapple too. Can you imagine what Alexander Volkov would do to this guy? Gelton Almeida? Aspinall Cyril Gahn? We have no movement now for Tellison Teixeira. He was supposed to go out there and dispose of Taito Ivasa quickly, and I think he really shat the bed. He looked bad, he looked terrible, and he actually made Taito Ivasa look good. Taito Ivasa was able to push forward and land the combos where he needed to, and I know Tellison won the first 2 rounds, so he still won the fight, he's still got time, he's still young, he can still improve, but I think we've realized that his ceiling is not going to be, his ceiling is where he's at right now. I don't think he's ever going to be a top 10, top 5 guy. He's now in the territory where the guys he's fighting know how to do everything in this division. He's not going to be able to just get away with being tall, lanky, and powerful. He's in a real tough spot, and I don't think he wins his next fight. So his stock happened to go down for me. The third one, and I feel like this is going to be a little bit controversial. Benoit Saint-Denis, man. Benoit Saint-Denis. I love Dan Hooker. I'm a Kiwi. I love Dan Hooker. But I've had to come to the realization that he's not a good fighter anymore, man. He was able to survive when the guys were like Dustin and everyone at the top of the division was just a striker at lightweight. Very little grapplers. But now that there's grapplers, the jig's up for Dan. You pressure him, you don't let him use his range, you take him down, you put him in an arm triangle, and you crush him. Same way Arman did it. Even his win over Gamrot was kind of an iffy split decision. Benoit Saint-Denis was supposed to go out there and crush Dan Hooker. And you can argue that he did do that in the second round. Once they were on the ground, he beat Dan up and he got the TKO finish. I get it. He did. And congrats to him on that. But the reason I'm saying his stock didn't go up for me is because Dan Hooker was winning that fight. First round, Dan Hooker was straight on him, bang, body kick, bang, body kick. You could see Benoit Saint-Denis kind of panicking a little bit. And all of those takedowns he was shooting, Dan was able to use the guillotine to get back up. Dan was stuffing his takedowns, using the guillotine to get back up. First round was kind of close. Benoit did end up on the top. But if you're having close fights with this point in Dan Hooker's career where he's clearly not in his prime, he's clearly not as committed, Arman set the blueprint for you, and he wasn't really able to follow it. You look at the second round. The only reason they ended up on the ground is because Dan made a dumb decision shooting a takedown. Benoit Saint-Denis is now at a point in the division where everyone in front of him, none of those guys are going to be making dumb decisions like that. Before the Dan Hooker fight, I expected Benoit to go out there, crush Dan Hooker, and I was thinking this guy might even beat Charles Oliveira. He might beat Max Holloway. He might be a future title contender. And now I'm like, dude, after seeing their performance, seeing how close Dan was able to make that, seeing at the moments where Dan had you hurt, and it was Dan's mistake that got you the win, not your own performance, I don't think Benoit Saint-Denis goes any further forward. I don't think he beats Gaethje. I don't think he beats I don't even think he beats Gaethje. And Gaethje's kind of not in his prime anymore. I don't think he beats Paddy. Or maybe he beats Paddy, but I don't think he beats Charles. He doesn't beat Max. He definitely doesn't beat Arman. He wouldn't even be able to compete with Arman. So Benoit Saint-Denis, his stock didn't go up for me there. I actually felt like it was a pretty average performance from him. I didn't think it was that great. I thought Dan Hooker actually had a chance to win that if he didn't make that stupid decision on a takedown. So it is what it is. At least he got the finish. At least he looked good on the ground where he did get him. And maybe he's just tough enough to fight these guys. And even if he doesn't have the skill level that they have or the technique, he can maraud his way through there and be the tougher guy and find a way to get them down and smother them. And once he had Dan down, it was in a different world. But everybody seems to do that with Dan Hooker. They seem to be able to out-grapple him. Even Jalen Turner was getting takedowns on Dan Hooker. So that's not something to be super proud of. But he did get the finish. He did a little bit better than the other guys on this list. But for me, man, Benoit Saint Denis's stock did not rise in that fight. I expected him to run through Dan Hooker like, a hot knife through butter. And that's just not what we saw. So it'll be interesting to see what the UFC does next with him. Maybe they will look to give him the loser of the BMF title, Max Holloway or Charles Oliveira. I think if Charles Oliveira loses, I think that's a fun fight. If Max loses, that's also a fun fight. So that's probably where they'll go with him. He does have a win over Mauricio Huffy, who looked amazing on the card, so that's always going to age well for him. The Moicano loss doesn't look good. And I'm starting to think the Dustin Poirier loss wasn't due to staph infection. I think that was just who Benoit Saint Denis is. I don't think he's as technical or as good as we kind of thought. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. Feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong, if you think he had a great performance and I'm just seeing things as a Dan Hooker fan, and in your head that was a completely one-sided fight. Maybe I am in the wrong. I know I'm right on the Jonathan Mekalev fight because he did look terrible on the feet that first round. And as someone that had money on him, I was very nervous he wasn't even going to win that fight. Who was number 2? Tellison. Tellison looked terrible as well. Taiko Ibasa nearly able to broke him. Benoit did a bit better than those guys, but for me, man, his stock just didn't really rise. So overall, it was a good card. There were a lot of good performances, but I just felt like I had to make this video to kind of be like, yeah, these guys got the win, but what do we do now? They're not really, they got the win, but just, or they got the win, but their stock didn't rise. Thanks for tuning in. This was another video from the MMA Mustache. Stay tuned for plenty more content.